And welcome back to By the Way, Broadway Baptist Church's podcast ministry for our 18 and under Sunday school classes as we continue going through the Gospel Project, Lifeway's chronological Bible study, starting in Genesis, ending in Revelation, and this week we are still in the book of Judges for one last time. My name is Pastor Justin, and joining me today are our wonderful ministry assistants and pastors over the other Sunday school young people ministries. I have Celeste, who will be speaking into an atomic bomb, it looks like. Yes. She has the biggest microphone in the world. Celeste over preschool, Jackson over middle school, and Lauren over the kids. That's just going to distract me. So I apologize ahead of time, faithful listeners, because as every time the microphone catches my eye, I can't see Celeste. She's hiding behind it. But that's okay. We're going to continue plowing forward. So today we are going to be looking at the story, the life, the downfall and detriment of Samson. Not Samson, right? We like to throw that P in there in the South. Samson.
That's right.
It's Samson, not Samsung,
Samsung,
like the TV or other small appliances you may have in your home, but Samson. Samson with the hair. With the good hair.
Not the son of Sam, though. Either.
Not the son of Sam.
Yeah.
Just Samson. Lots of things he's not. One thing he is, and that's what a loser. We'll have to investigate that more. I think you might be right. So where in the world are we? We know we're talking about Samson this week, but what got us to this point? Well, we've been in the book of Judges for the past 3 weeks, and just to recap, we've seen a lot of bad leadership. As soon as Joshua's generation dies, the people go through this cycle of, if there's a leader, they, for the most part, follow him and do what he says and are somewhat committed to the Lord, at least outwardly. And then when that leader dies, we see this this awful refrain of, the people did again what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And they go back to worshiping false idols, false gods, breaking all of the commands they can, and certainly doing things that God discourages or flat out says do not do. When they do that and they commit those sins, God allows them to be overrun by some foreign land. He will raise up a nation to come and capture them, to put them into bondage. And for some amount of time, some years, sometimes a lot of years, Israel will be under the thumb, or parts of Israel will be under the thumb of these foreign people and foreign rulers. At some point, Israel cries out, and God raises up another judge. And so this cycle continues, it seems like, again and again and again. And while we're not looking at every single judge in the book of Judges, we do look at this cycle. I think 4 times is probably enough. We don't need to spend any more time in Judges after this to get the big picture. And as we'll mention at the end of the podcast, if you have young kids, you probably shouldn't spend any more time in Judges after this, because those last 4 chapters get really dicey. Things. If you thought it was bad, yes, no pun intended. Or maybe it was. We've seen that the people in Israel got to the point last week as we looked at Gideon. They don't even have the decency to let Gideon die before they start acting crazy, and they start trying to worship him and his sons while he's still alive. Gideon thwarts that. He says, nope, I'm not going to be your leader. I'm not going to be your king. My sons won't be your king. God's supposed to be your king. But guess what happens? Gideon dies, and the people do what was evil in the sight of the Lord again. So we're skipping a lot. Like I said, we're not going to cover every judge, but just a really fast kind of view of what are the things that we're missing between Gideon and Samson. Well, things like Gideon not being a great guy, had a lot of wives, so many wives that he had 70 sons. We don't even know how many wives he had, but 70 sons from those wives, and then another son by not a wife, one of his concubines named Abimelech, and Abimelech goes through and wants to be king. He wants to be the ruler of the land, something that Gideon said, nope, we shouldn't be doing that. Well, to secure his place as king, he goes through and kills all of Gideon's 70 kids, minus one, who escapes. Bad things happen to Abimelech. Bad things happen to the city that decides that they're going to back Abimelech. So bad things happen to everybody there. A couple of judges are mentioned briefly after this guy, one named Tola, and another named Jair, who knows how you say it. Say whatever you want to say. But we go through the cycle again and again and again, and we get to this point in chapter 10 where God says this, yet you have forsaken me and served other gods. They're crying out to be delivered again. And God says, you have forsaken me and served other gods. Therefore, I will save you no more. Go and cry out to the gods whom you have chosen. Let them deal with it. That's not part of the text. Let them save you in the time of your distress. And the people of Israel said to the Lord, we have sinned. Do to us whatever seems good to you. Only please deliver us this day. So they put away the foreign gods from among them and served the Lord, and he became impatient over the misery of Israel. So when they actually repented, at least in the temporary, in the short term, and then God was willing to go back and rescue them. And so the cycle continues. God's not going to leave them in their despair. He's not going to leave them in their trouble. We see people like Jephthah, another son of a wayward lifestyle. And at this point, we get to chapter 11, we realize about 300 years has passed from the time that Joshua's entered the land and they began this conquest until this time now. And so we don't necessarily see that in the text anywhere else. It's the only really date that we're going to have. But a lot of time has passed. A lot of sin cycles have been accomplished.
They've been a mess for a long time.
Yes, and things are only going to get worse, right? So this is not even the bottom of the rock bottom. They've been a mess for a long time, like Jackson said. And so, Jephthah makes a plea to God, and he says, Lord, if you will deliver us and give me deliverance from these people, then the next thing that I see, I'm going to sacrifice on a burnt offering. And who else but his own daughter comes out of the house, and he makes good on his vow. A lot of scholars try to explain that away, but there's really not a lot of explaining away what he did. And so even the judges have lost their minds.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot of redeeming characters other than God himself in the entire book of Judges. But, I know we're not to Samson yet, but I'm going to go ahead and say, by the way, when I think of crazy vows and crazy promises and people being misled, two things come to mind. One, have you ever heard of Hastings Cutoff?
Nope.
It's not a sweet
No.
shirt that they make in Arkansas. It was a shortcut in 1847. So you had people that were trying to move out west because everyone wanted to go to California in 1847. Get the gold. Yeah, they hadn't even found the gold yet, but they were still trying to get out there. Yeah, their gold. This was pre-gold rush. They were trying to get there. But there was one particular group. You may have heard their name before, the Donner Party. Yes? No? You never? I'm so excited right now. Let's go. All right. So the Donner Party, they were from Illinois, and they were going to move out west. And they meet this dude. His last name is Hastings, and he has found a shortcut to go out west. And he's actually done it before, supposedly. We'll see. So he's taken this shortcut and said, hey, if you follow the Hastings cutoff, the Hastings shortcut, we're going to lose 300 miles of this trip. Like when the GPS says recalculating, oh, that's going to be a shorter distance? Sure, I will. I'm going to go that way instead. And so they go through this supposed shortcut and end up in a desert, and it's long, and it's grueling, and it puts them a month behind. And then they get to these mountains in California, but because they're a month behind, now they're stuck in snow, and they get stuck on the mountain in this snowstorm, and most of the people die, and the people run out of food, and some of them are still hungry. Yeah, and you see where this story's going, right?
No.
So it's gone astray. Sometimes when we see crazy promises, like I promise that I can make your trip shorter, and you're going to get gold faster. You'll be enjoying those beaches with Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger in no time.
In 1847.
In 1847. Hey, listen, he's the Terminator. He can travel to whatever time he wants. It didn't work out. Another crazy promise, and I won't tell you which presidential candidate said this in the last 10 years. But one particular presidential candidate promised that if you vote for me, we're going to cure cancer.
Amen.
People did vote for him. He, in fact, did not cure cancer. So better luck next time.
Man.
Maybe so. Maybe not. Anyway, don't be misled by people named Hastings. If your name's Hastings, I apologize.
That's
Hopefully
unfortunate.
you don't have a shortcut somewhere through the mountains. Don't be misled by people who say they have a cure for cancer, and don't be misled or make crazy boneheaded vows like old Jephthah, whatever his name was. Anyway, so those are a little bit of what we're skipping in the book of Judges. But this week we're looking at the man, the myth, the legend, the long and luxurious locks of Samson himself. So what do we know about Samson?
Well, he had some long and luxurious locks.
Okay, we do know that. The man had some hair.
As a result of this vow that his parents made, to the Lord regarding him and his life. He was going to be a Nazarite, or they took the Nazarite vow, which is it's all the way back, a vow that was talked about in the law back in Numbers. What was it, Numbers 6?
Yep, number 6.
Where there are some parameters that this child or whoever was going to make this Nazarite vow had to live by to keep themselves pure and undefiled before the Lord. One of which was not cutting their hair. They would let their locks grow long like Samson did. At one point in the story, he's got 7 big old braids on his head. That's just a fun image for me to picture. I wish I had that hair. I wish that was acceptable in our culture and in our church. Maybe I can do that one day. We'll try it.
Jackson has since taken the Nazarite vow.
Yes.
And will be growing his hair out.
Right.
Don't be alarmed.
Right.
Yeah, which most of the time the Nazarite vow was a temporary thing. But by the way, here's mine.
Ooh.
There are 2 other people in the Bible that took the Nazarite vow from birth. Do y'all remember who they are?
Well, not Samson's dad,
No.
but Sam.
Sam.
Yuel.
Yeah.
It has to be
Samuel.
Samuel, and it never
Yes.
explicitly says Nazarite vow, but it does
Okay.
imply that when it
Okay.
says that his hair, shall not be cut.
Right.
Right. And then if we had to fast forward a little bit for the next one, right?
Right.
Maybe all the way to the New Testament. Maybe in the Gospels. Maybe his name starts with J.
And ends with on.
John.
John.
John the Baptizer.
John the Baptist.
There are a lot of
Yes.
Johns in the Gospels, yes, but John the Baptist. And again, it never explicitly says that he's taking the Nazarite vow, but some of the restrictions and prohibitions put upon him, it seems to follow and track the same way. And so some of those restrictions are, and this is important, I think, because we see Samson ultimately break.
He's towing
Yes.
the line. The whole
Right, he's
time.
towing the line the entire time. There are some that maybe he doesn't break, but things like he was not supposed to partake of any of the fruit of the vine, right? No grapes, no grape skins, no grape seeds, no wine, no vinegar, no Welch's, nothing like that. No grapes. He was not supposed to touch any dead bodies. Now, there's some disagreement. Does this just human bodies? Does it count if there happens to be a dead lion laying around? Or maybe a donkey's jawbone? I'm not sure. But he's not supposed to be touching dead stuff or being near people when they die. All right? So we can put that out there. And third, and maybe most importantly for this story, he's not supposed to go to Fantastic Sam's and get a haircut.
Yeah.
Or wherever you
Yes.
happen to find yourself. He's not supposed to go to Cammy's hair salon and get a nice fade or trim. Can't be doing all that.
No.
So those are 3 things that Samson shouldn't do. Now, as you listen to our recap of this this narrative, see if you can find the ways that Samson utterly fails at the Nazarite vow.
Well, and another thing that we think about Samson, I don't know, I just have like so many pictures in my mind of like children's cartoons, but he's always like this super buff dude,
He
right?
is,
Like
yes.
a bodybuilder. Arnold Schwarzenegger, we've already talked about him today. But I really doubt he was like, I mean, he probably had muscles maybe, but I mean, that's what made it so miraculous, right?
Yeah.
Is that God was working through him and it was God who was giving him strength, not his muscles.
One thing that I read, it was like, why would what's her name, Delilah, be so, like, she had to ask so many questions to figure out what was the source of his strength,
Right.
if obviously it wasn't his muscles.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Samson could have just said gains, bro.
So,
and
yeah,
then
he
that
could have
would've
just said
been
I work out, and she was like, obviously not. So it's got to be something else.
That's right. That's right. So when you picture Samson and he's just super jacked, he is the Giga Chad of the Old Testament, then, that's for our younger listeners. You'll know what that means. Then no, probably erase that picture. Doesn't mean he was a Poindexter behind a desk, but he was probably just a normal dude, except for his hair. I bet he had a really strong neck. What do you think? With all that hair on his head?
Yeah.
Must have.
That's so.
It's probably really like dreads, like these beautiful dreads going down.
That's right.
Man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there was only 7. We're only 7.
Yeah, so it was
Yeah.
like a giant Cynthia doll from Rugrats, right? Who knows? Who knows what he actually looked like? Probably not. Anyway, moving on. All right, so we know what it means now for him to have been a Nazarite, to have that vow bestowed upon him from birth. But really, things go off the rails with Samson once we get introduced to him almost immediately. We see in chapter 14, Samson, the good Nazarite, wants to marry a Philistine woman. And if you know anything about the Philistines, that's the group of people that has currently enslaved and is tormenting Israel.
Also, they are not Israelites.
They are not
That's
Israelites.
important.
Exactly. They are supposed to marry within Israel and not cross-pollinate with the people in a sense. We'll call it cross-pollinate. Sounds good. All right, so he wants to marry a Philistine woman. He does marry a Philistine woman, kind of. And a lot of weird events lead up to their wedding, one of
So
which
weird.
is a super awesome riddle. Isn't that right, Celeste?
Yeah.
Had to make sure she was still there behind her microphone.
It's me. I'm here.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we see
Those
things like
riddles.
Samson kills a lion. Honey grows in the lion. He likes to eat the honey. Wait a second. Now there's a dead lion that he's eating out of. I wonder if that breaks his Nazirite vow.
Some say yes, some say no.
Yeah, still in dispute. We'll leave that to you, listener. We don't really know. But he eats dead lion honey, and then he shares it with some friends, gives it to other people. He gets mad that these Philistines find out the source of his riddle because he was ready to win 30 garments, and then he kills them too. Wait a second. I wonder if that killing people
Yeah,
would...
he fill in the gaps. He killed 30 people to get their
Yeah.
garments. Yeah.
Yeah, so he gets the garments from them. He kills the 30 people. I hope that doesn't break his Nazirite vow. Whoops. We'll see.
Yeah.
He goes on. Let's see. He uses the jawbone of a donkey. Guess what? The donkey is dead, and he's touching it. He's swinging that thing
That
around.
didn't necessarily
And
say it was
used for an instrument of death, too, by the way.
Yes, and he kills 1,000 more Philistines with that.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to explain your way around that one. Like I see some people explain around the animals, like, well, it was probably just the Lord meant you can't touch dead bodies because that's what the law specifically said. Like,
Well, can I create them? Because that's what
like,
Samson's doing.
Yeah, he created a lot of dead bodies and was around them. So
And then we get introduced to another savory character named Delilah, and Delilah really wants to give Samson a haircut. Once she finds
Delilah.
out.
but he doesn't know that.
He doesn't know that, and he lies and tells a bunch of crazy stories to her along the way. Ultimately, he does get a nice trim, and all of his power goes away because the Spirit of the Lord has left him. He has definitely broken the Nazirite vow once he goes bald, or we don't know if he was bald. I just like to... I like to picture a nice Mr. Clean look at this point. But his hair gets cut. He gets taken away, bound up, his eyes gouged out, and goes into Philistine captivity for some time, right? And then we see his, and I'll put some air quotes around it, his sacrificial death. Certainly he sacrifices himself, but not really for the good of everybody, but more so for his own revenge, his swan song before he crushes the building that he's in.
Yeah.
So there we go.
Man.
That is Samson.
Samson's full of
If you
stuff,
read it from the children's storybook, he might be a jack dude with long hair and have a nice,
most likely.
a nice, better censored version. But Samson, we're not saying he's a great guy, but this is what Israel's dealing with at this time. These are their leaders, not the most stand-up men in the world. So that's we've kind of gone through it very quickly. Let's talk about how we're going to introduce this story in our respective ministries. Celeste, are you going to give the preschooler scissors and have them give haircuts to
Tie some
unexpecting
foxes together.
congregants?
Man.
You're at least gonna eat some honey
No.
and not tell the children where it came from.
Yeah, so we are telling your children the story. We are skipping a lot in this story
kinda have
though
to,
with
yeah.
them. There's not going to be a lion or honey in the lion, giving it to people, no wife, no riddles, nothing like that, killing people. We're not going through any of that. We're going to focus on our main story point, which is that Samson's strength came from God. We're going to see and talk about the beginning of this story a little bit, where the angel of the Lord comes and tells Samson's parents that he is going to be born, although Samson's mother was barren, and promises them a child, and goes through the do's and don'ts of this promise. And so we're going to focus on that. And then we're skipping straight to Delilah. And we're going to see her ask Samson multiple times about this, and that he will get a haircut. And we're also going to focus on the ending of Samson's quote unquote sacrificial death. And just kind of really reiterating that, that strength came from God. It was taken away, and that God gave it back. He heard Samson's cry and gave it back to him. So that's us this week.
Okay. All right. Well, watch yourself, congregation. The preschoolers are out. They could be tying foxes together. We don't know.
Jawbones, all the things.
Jawbones, honey, don't eat anything they offer you. That's probably just a good rule of thumb anyway.
I would say that in general. You don't know if that's been on the floor, in somebody else's mouth, or a boogery hand. I just wouldn't recommend it.
Amen. Well, on that note, what about you, Lauren? How are you going to introduce Samson to the kiddos?
So, like the preschool, our main point is Samson learned that strength comes from God alone. And we do focus a lot more on the stories. I mean, like the production levels, details of the story about the lion and the foxes and the jawbone and Delilah and eventually his death. And it highlights a lot of these things, but I don't feel like our curriculum does a great job of like showing the bad parts of Samson's life too, and that it wasn't just this like glorious, awesome action film, that he is sinful, and rightly so. A lot of those details are left out. I mean, we don't want our grade school kids knowing a lot of the details of Samson's life, but I do think it's important for us to tell them Samson was far from holy or righteous. He lived a worldly life. He was selfish. He was arrogant and prideful. He was reckless in the way that he treated others. He was angry. And all of that is what is motivating Samson, not God's honor, which is what it should have been. So, we'll look at Samson and compare that to Christ. There are some similarities between Samson and Christ. Like you mentioned, they were both born to women in unlikely stories. Mary was not barren. She gave birth supernaturally to Jesus, but the similarities there. And then also they were both betrayed for silver. I mean, different little details in their stories, but more than Samson being a type of Christ, I mean, honestly, he's an anti-type of Christ, of like everything Samson was, Jesus is not. And so just comparing them, but ultimately, I mean, they do both die and redeem God's people and save God's people. Samson in a very reckless and vengeful way, but there's still some similarities there that we can draw to Jesus. So yeah, that's what we'll be looking at this week in the Kids Men.
Perfect. Yeah, that's awesome. I love the fact that you're going to mention the fact that Samson, like many of our Old Testament characters, is not this whitewashed VeggieTales version that sometimes we get introduced to. Yeah. So that doesn't mean we have to go into all the nitty-gritty details at that young age. We'll save that for when the kids are older and more mature and able to handle that information, but still good. Well, Jackson, what about in our middle school and high school ministries?
Yeah, so as we were, discussing this lesson, Timothy took it upon himself to do some study and search his theological textbooks and commentaries and all of that, and he figured he would come up with a better main point for our lesson, and that is a fresh chop or haircut. For those of you who don't know, a fresh chop can change your life.
It's true.
Amen.
Good or bad.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's actually not our point. That was just Timothy's joke that he threw in right before we started. But our real main point is that disobedience blinds us and creates distance between us and God. And Lifeway did a decent job on this one. We get to look at Samson's many mistakes, the sin of his life, and I love how they threw in that disobedience blinds us because, Samson was blinded in more than just one way. But we'll take a look at that. But Samson, his life was a mess. We see disobedience all over, whether it was his touching of the dead corpse of a lion or the many other corpses that he touched, whether he might have or might not have consumed the fruit of the vine at his rehearsal dinner party. We don't know. Some speculate that he probably did. Whatever it was, the cutting of his hair, we know that was wrong. As Lauren said, aside from just breaking the Nazirite vow, Samson's heart was bent away from the Lord and to himself. So he was just living a total life of sin, sinful attitudes, sinful mistreatment of others, sinful misplaced worship. He worshipped himself. He wanted what he wanted. Even when he went to when he wanted his wife, he just went to his parents and was like, "She looks good to me. Go get her for me." I mean, just all about himself. So that's sinful. But we see God use this. We see God use this sinful character, this totally messed up dude, to work his own purposes for the nation of Israel. So our kind of subpoints, disobedience obviously leads to distance between us and God. That's true for us. That was true for Samson. That's true for the nation of Israel. But then we also see how God can work through our mistakes. God kind of basically gave Samson a choice. He said, basically, I'm going to rescue my people. We already knew that. We know that God is going to work on behalf of his chosen nation. He gives Samson a choice. Are you going to receive that blessing with my people, or are you just going to be my instrument to bring that about? And then you're off the scene. Well, he chose the latter, and his sin led to that distance, but that didn't stop God from completing his plan for destroying the Philistines.
Yeah, no, that's very true. Very good. One thing I think about that sometimes for me gets lost in the story is the fact that Samson was a judge over Israel, it says, for 20 years. And you don't hear about anything. You hear about the craziness at the beginning. You hear about the fall at the end with Delilah and all that, but you don't really hear about anything that he's done for these 20 years. And it's just a great reminder that really the way we end is how we get remembered. One way or the other, good or bad. And so we have to finish strong. Like the race isn't over until we're gone or until the Lord comes back, and we have to finish strong. Not that Samson necessarily started strong. He wasn't doing great on either end of the race, but we don't know anything about that time judging Israel for 20 years in between.
I'm sure he was just perfect in that time.
His hair was long and flowing. We don't even know if he washed it. He was taking it very seriously. Hopefully he did. But he did not finish well. And he didn't finish well because instead of focusing on God, he focused on women and not the women he should have been focusing on. And we saw that those relationships and his lack of focus on God and what God called him to do really led to his downfall. There are a lot of things we could discuss here, just a few questions that I'll throw out to you all, and certainly you can throw out more if you'd like. One that I thought of was this: how does this narrative help us understand the differences between outward actions and the inward condition of our hearts?
Well, I think, it shows us just like our motives, like, and how does that play into what we're doing? Like Samson, he killed a lot of Philistines, right? Like they were the ones that were oppressing God's people, but he wasn't doing that for God or for God's glory. He was doing that for his own selfish desires or vengeance or whatever it was that he was doing it for. And even, at the end, like we had said, like his death, he sacrificed himself, but that wasn't for God. That was for his own vengeance. And I think it just lets us be reminded, like, what are we doing on a day-to-day basis? And why are we doing it? We can do a lot of really good things for in our church, in our community, in our homes, but what is the motive behind why we're doing it? Because that's what God is looking at. I can do really good things and just want to do it so that it makes me look good and gives me glory, but that's not what God calls us to do. So
yeah, Samson, he made a lot of mistakes, and a lot of his outward actions were wrong, but some of them turned for good. Some of them the Lord used, the destruction of the Philistines, and among others, I'm sure that he made some good judgments over the course of his life. But like we know, that's not, good actions aren't always rooted in good inward heart desires. And like we've already said, Samson's heart was messed up. Yeah. It was all about himself.
Exactly. It was messed up. I think, that old adage, the ends justify the means. We see that is clearly not true, clearly not biblical. That is not a principle that we need to live our lives upon, because we can be used by God to accomplish his will and still not be in his will in the inward spiritual sense. He can use us in spite of ourselves, and we know that he always does. But it doesn't mean that we are experiencing the grace, mercy, love, forgiveness, and salvation of God. He could still be using us as an instrument because that's what he chooses to do. And so we have to think, okay, well, we search our motives. Like you said, Celeste, we have to see, is this something that inwardly I'm doing this from a place of God loves me and this an outpouring of that love? Or am I going through the motions or trying to fulfill a vow or trying to meet my own needs? And God happens to be using me in those mistakes anyway, because we know he can.
Yeah, God's purpose is going to come about regardless of what we're doing. So just because, something is happening from our actions, I mean, that's not limiting God. That's just showing us our sinful selves.
Yeah. Very good. Well, here's another question I thought about. And these questions that we're talking about around the table aren't just for us. These are questions that you can think of as families, and you can discuss as families as well, that maybe help you to frame your discussion on Samson, the good, the bad, and the ugly. How does this narrative help us explain the seriousness of sin and its consequences? Take that back. And its consequences.
Well, I mean, in one facet, you see through the entire book of Judges, really, you see a digression of the judges and their righteousness. But even in Samson's life, it starts with him wanting a wife that he shouldn't have and eating a little honey. And it doesn't seem all that bad, right? But it just becomes worse and worse and worse as the story progresses, to where now a little joke and riddle becomes this lie about where his true strength comes from. And it destroys him and it destroys the people around him. And so in that regard, just how easy it is if we just give in to like a little taste of sin, for your sins to just become more and more powerful and part of who you are. So, just a word of warning for parents to children, like, keep your guard up. Like, you may think this is a little sin that won't hurt anybody, but it can grow and fester and infect, your entire life and completely destroy you. So I think Samson's life teaches us that. But ultimately, there's a price to be paid for our sin, right? And Samson had to pay that price as the judge, just as well as the Philistines did. Both of them were met with death in the face of sin. And so in the eyes of God, sin is sin. Like, it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you grew up in church. It doesn't matter if you live in a land that has never heard the gospel. Sin is sin, and sin requires punishment. And so Samson's story reminds us of that too. And it seems really hopeful, but hopefully we in our Sunday school classes and even at home, we use that hopeless ending of the story to point to Christ of like, yeah, sin costs, and it cost us a life, and not just our life, but God himself died for that sin. And how amazing is that God, the eternal being who was not created, he died for our sin. So it's pretty amazing that happened. And so hopefully we can turn our kids to that sign at the end of like, yeah, Samson really screwed it up, but praise the Lord that Jesus came and he can fix our sin.
Yeah. I love the point that you made about it doesn't matter who you are, because look at Samson. He is the judge. You said that. That means he's chosen by God. He's got that status. He's got that name on him. But he's also a Nazirite by birth. Like, that's a pretty important, like, he's even more set apart by God.
And then he's gifted this supernatural strength.
Exactly.
By God.
But that doesn't excuse his sin. Sin is sin. Sin is not based upon who you are. It's based on the holiness of God, and you've not upheld the holiness of God or reflected his character in the way that you were created to do. I think sometimes, even as, like you said, people who grow up in the church, we can look on the outside, and we have this different standard of what sin is for us. It's just they're small things for us,
right.
But the sin outside the walls of the church building, those are really egregious. So I think it's important, really, just to have a right theology or right thinking of sin.
Yeah, that's very good. And one thing that you mentioned, Lauren, just these seemingly small sins. Well, he just wants a wife. He just wants to eat some dead lion honey. He just wants to, do this
It's
or
just
that.
a riddle.
Just a riddle. It reminds me, and I know I'm pulling this verse really out of the midst of a parable that Jesus is telling, but it's one thing that's been very profound in recent weeks with some of the conversations I've had, where Jesus says, one who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much. And if we see these small things, these small interactions, these seemingly small sins as something that it doesn't really matter if I'm faithful or not. It's not affecting anybody. It's a little white lie. It's just a little honey. It's just a wife. It's just office supplies that I'm stealing. It's just this. It's just that. Whatever it may be. Well, that's indicative of your internal character, and that is going to show up in bigger ways.
Yeah.
Maybe not where everyone finds out. Maybe it doesn't land you in a supermax prison, but at some point, your internal character, whether it's a little thing or a big thing, like we've all said, is completely and totally either redeemed by Christ or tainted by sin. And so where are we going to fall? Are we going to let the Spirit work in the little and the big, or are we going to try to make our own decisions in our own power and end up with our eyes gouged out in a weird Philistine temple? We don't want that to happen. All right, well, let's end on a more positive note. One more question. So we've already talked about this a little bit, but let's just really hammer it home. Where do we see redemption in this narrative, and how does it foreshadow that better redemption to come? Because the redemption we see here is really kind of a weird one. It's not a perfect redemption that we would
Not
like at the end of the story.
And it's also, it's a partial redemption. We see that Israel as a whole is just, in shambles and running all different directions and doing what's right in their own eyes. But God delivers them in this area of the nation. He delivers them from this certain people group through a sinful, broken man. We see God redeem the situation of Samson's sins, Samson's turning away from the Lord, Samson's fall to being blind, being bald, or whatever we want to call him, being weak, and just pitiful. But God redeems the situation. He doesn't necessarily redeem Samson, because Samson, in his final prayer and his final plea for strength from the Lord, like we've talked about, it didn't really come from I want to see your glory come from this situation that I've messed up. He's like, I want to get vengeance on the Philistines. We see God redeem that situation, redeem even in the midst of his sin, his brokenness, his evil heart. God redeems the situation and turns it for the destruction of Israel's enemies. I think what's important to note, though, is all the way back in chapter 14, when Samson desires this Philistine wife. His parents are upset by this because they're faithful Israelites. Well, I don't know how faithful, but they didn't want him to marry outside of the Israelite community. And verse 4 of chapter 14, it says, his father and mother did not know that this was from the Lord, for he was seeking an opportunity against the Philistines. At that time, the Philistines ruled over Israel. So it's not necessarily that we don't know that God planted this idea in Samson's heart, but we do know that God was working in the midst of this sinful situation throughout the entire story, throughout Samson's mistakes, throughout his intentional sin before the Lord. The Lord was always planning to use it to destroy Israel's enemies and rescue them from them. So we see that this is a partial redemption, but we also see it foreshadow in among the many ways. Lauren, you pointed out some about how this reflects what's coming, the connections we can make to the passion narrative and the story of Christ. But we see our better Redeemer coming, the one who did not sin along the way in his life, the one who lived a perfect life, the one who did not achieve a partial redemption. It was a total redemption that's not yet complete. One day it will be complete, where the entire creation is redeemed, but in a far greater way than Samson, Christ has redeemed not just part of his chosen people, but all of them, and not just in a physical way from a physical bondage, but Christ has rescued us from the bondage of our heart, which Samson needed to. So
very good. Well, we have the opportunity to talk about all the good things, all the bad things, and especially with Samson, all the ugly things, except that hair. Within the
Beautiful.
story, all the sin, all of the struggle, but also the partial redemption that Samson mirrors and the better redemption that we have through Christ. Have those conversations with your kids. Don't just make this a whitewashed Bible story from the kids' storybook. Make this a real warning about sin, a real testament to God's mercy and faithfulness, and a real picture of a better redemption that we have in Jesus Christ. Do it wherever you find yourselves, in the car rider line, at the dinner table, getting ready for bed. Have good and gospel conversations with your kids, with your spouses, with anyone who will have them, by the way.